Good morning, my beautiful babes and babettes. I'm your resident active advocate, and I had computer access this morning. Yay! So I was able to write. Yay! If my upload schedule is a little bit erratic within the next little while, that is the reason why. Don't yell at me. I'm in love with my book. So it's very nice to have a little baby to be raising up. It's so sweet. Ugh, love it. So today I would like to talk about what I missed with the access for outdoor spaces standards. And it's not so much that I missed stuff within the AODA itself, but I left out information for like public design standards. The design of public places standard is not necessarily part of the AODA itself, but works in conjunction with it and focuses primarily on places where people work and play and shop, was what the informational video told me this morning. And this has to do with, as I had said in my earlier video on this topic, making places like playgrounds accessible for children. But one thing that I did neglect to mention was the whole parking arrangement. If you are going into a building, there does need to be around that building, if it's a public place, accessible parking. There's a certain percentage, depending on how big your parking lot is, of spots that need to be accessible. For example, at my old high school, they had, and this was when I attended, I don't know whether this has changed since I've been there, but in their whole parking lot, they had 2 accessible spots, which, considering the size of the parking lot, was fine. But the problem was those spots were often monopolized by people who didn't need them. And I don't know if it's strictly illegal in Ontario to use accessible parking if you don't need it, but it's sort of a, no, not sort of, it's definitely a moral no-no to do so. If you do not have the accessible parking pass that you can put in your window and show that you have a disability that requires that pass, you should not be using those spaces. This takes my dad off too. He drives professionally for a living, and whenever he sees people pulling into those spots who don't need them, he always gets really ticked off, because I have an accessibility sticker of my own that that we use whenever we go shopping with me, but at the same time, I don't necessarily need to use that spot. If my mom or my dad, sees like a pregnant woman, who has a stroller or something like that, who needs the spot more than I do, or, someone who has a more pronounced disability than I do, because mine is just that I can't walk for very long distances without getting out of breath. I have a heart condition. I don't have a problem using my legs. It's just that I can't walk for long distances. So I am a part-time wheelchair user, as I believe I've mentioned. But my mom and my dad, they will park further away from the building to let people who really need the spot use them. Because I can get out of the car. I can walk around back of the car. When my dad or my mom are getting the wheelchair out of the car, and we don't necessarily need that much space unless we're in a hurry. But that is part of the standard as well, to have accessible parking at least to a certain percentage of your parking lot, and for those spaces not to be monopolized by people who don't need them. I am speaking directly to you if you are one of the people who does this. You annoy me? Stop it! Stop it! Bad dog! Bad. So that's basically what I left out on that video. But it's also a matter of just making things overall accessible from the moment that planning begins for a design of a public space nowadays with the AODA in place, right from the moment of the planning phase beginning. The space needs to be planned out as being accessible to all sorts of different people. It doesn't matter how you get around. It needs to be accessible to you. Yes, you. That is so that everyone has equal access to every space that they want to get to. Going to the park, going to the mall, crossing the street. We have so many different places that we all need to get to at so many different times. And, when we have kids and we want to take them to a playground, we want that playground to be accessible to us, to our children, that sort of thing, to make everything very universal, to open places up to people who would not necessarily otherwise have access to these spaces. That is the whole point of this endeavor of the AODA. It's not an add-on. It's not an add-on for the sake of accommodating people with disabilities. It is meant to be incorporated into the building itself, into the planning itself, not as an afterthought, but as a forethought, as something that is just taken for granted. We all kind of take those sloping curves for granted now, just because they're there, they're part of our environment. But, back 20, 30, 40 years ago, they weren't part of our environment, and we never would have seen that sort of thing. I think that the main point of integration, of access, is to start taking these things for granted, is to say, yeah, this is just a thing that happens now. This is just a thing that our society does. Because the more, in touch we are with these things, the more we see them, the more exposure we have to them, then the more comfortable we are with them. That's always the way. Our brains are going to be more comfortable with the things that it recognizes rather than the things that our brains don't recognize. So that's the whole point of access. That's the whole point of integration. And yet again, I forget my topic for tomorrow, but I will have that prepared for you for tomorrow. And hopefully I didn't leave too much out, and it can be like this video, kind of short and sweet. And now, my dear friends, I'm getting back to writing, at least until 11:30, and then I have to work. Damn. All right. Thank you for your lovely attendance and attention, and I will see y'all tomorrow. Mwah.